Welcome to Being a Successful Leader with Carl Welty. Carl is a leadership pioneer with years of challenging leadership and consulting experience. Here's Carl with some valuable insights, practical and proven methods for being a successful leader.
Greetings, Carl Welty here. First of our series, our podcast series of being a successful leader. We have 26 episodes divided into three what I call areas of emphasis, which revolve around three imperatives I see as the key of being a successful leader. The first one is being a skillful, self-aware leader. That's the area we're in right now. The second is formulating, executing a sound strategy. And the third is building a culture of commitment. So skillful, self-aware leader, sound strategy, and culture of commitment. Each episode runs from about 15 to 30 minutes. And to pick up past episodes, you can go to my website, welty.com, click on leadership resources, and scroll down. You'll see a place there where you can click to get the past episodes of the podcast. Today is the final of the 9 episodes we have under the imperative of skilled, self-aware leader. We've done a lot here. We spent the first part trying to help you deal with the subconscious priorities, preferences, and tendencies you have and surface those so you're just more aware, more cognizant of those kinds of tendencies and consequently can benefit. And then we looked at 3 skill areas so you could be a skillful as well as self-aware leader. One was self-perception to sharpen your skills. The other is communicating skillfully and about differences. And the last one was using an adaptive as well as a natural behavior. So there was a lot covered there. And my guess is that maybe you have an idea or two in terms of behavioral change you'd like to make personally. And so I thought it timely again to have this series or this episode deal with a very, very sound process I have to think through and to take prudent action to make these shifts, these behavioral shifts. When it's something more than just having a good intention, you got to go with some quality thinking and some actions to make it happen. So we're going to run through this process of 9 steps. And what I'd like you to do is to get a piece of paper and just jot down 1 to 9 and maybe just put down the title of each of these steps and maybe a few notes, and then come back to it later or replay this episode or go back, as I said, to my website later and pick it up. Now, before we get going with that, throughout the podcast, I've been emphasizing 2 commitments that I think every leader, every person actually should make. One is having a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And the second is continuous learning and growth, to commit to those. And certainly this process helps us do both of those, especially when there's something that we want to do to move from point A to point B. As we work through the process, it's important to understand, I call this the principle of the current me. It's kind of an odd title, but I can't think of a better one. The principle of the current me, that you and I are a product of a couple of things. And this ties back to what we've talked about in this particular area of emphasis. One is that it's the way I think about things, my mental models. And the other is the practices I engage in. So if we want to make behavioral change, we've got to change one or both of those. We got to change the way we think about things, and we got to change the way we go about things, our practices. So that becomes important. The model, as we work through it, be helpful if you had a particular behavioral change in mind you'd like to make. Not necessary. You're not going to have a lot of time to work on it as we go through the model, but at later on, maybe pick it up and proceed or go back to it later. And if you don't have any particular behavior change at this time you'd like to make, that's fine. But be sure to put the process in safe storage or go back to it later on, because it'll be helpful to you very, very much so. As we go through the process, I'll be using an example. Let's call this person Harvey, and we'll talk about Harvey and how he is thinking about and working through these steps. I also have an earlier edition of the process we're going through in two of my books, the book on making and fulfilling your dreams as a leader and communicating about differences. They're in appendix form. This is really an update of that as my thinking has advanced as I've applied the model even more. Okay. All right. Let's go through the steps now. Maybe get a piece of paper to step 1 to 9 and maybe just jot down the title and a note or two if you want. All right. Logical place to start is with the goal. The goal is step 1. What is the behavioral change I am committed to make? Okay. And summarize in a well-worded sentence. Okay. So that's a predictable start. Now, Harvey, our hypothetical Harvey here, Harvey is committed to being less directive and more collaborative and delegative in working with his leadership team. That's his goal or his commitment. The second step of the 9 is importance. Why is this important? What would happen if I did nothing, if I just left it alone? That's important questions to ponder. Now, Harvey thinks about that and he says, based on pushback he received from his leadership team and his own thinking, he thinks it's time to be a more inclusive, more interactive leader with his leadership team as situational variables allow him to do so and dictate. And he thinks he'll get better results this way and provide a healthier working environment. So that's why Harvey thinks it's important to make this behavioral shift. Number 3 of the 9, previous attempts. What, if anything, have I tried? How did it go? What, if anything, have I learned? And how might that be useful to me now? As Harvey reflects, he has not really made any conscious efforts to shift his leader-manager behavior up until now, but is motivated to get going with the shift at this point. Number 4 step of our process out of the 9 is measures of success. How do you know success when you see it? What are the specific evidences that that'll tell you that I have achieved the goal? Articulate the measures of success in a series of what I call when statements that represent evidence of success. When A happens, when B happens, when C happens, these are results, not activities, results. And gee whiz, if you're around that, you'd say, hey, I think I've hit the ball pretty good here. Now, Harvey, he went through this process of measures of success, and he has 3. A greater staff involvement in problem solving and decision making. The second one is a better quality problem solving and decision making by involving his group more. And the third one is easier implementation of decisions. Those are bottom line payoffs he hopes to get. And if he gets them, he say, hey, I think this is working pretty good as he makes this shift to a more inclusive style of leadership and management. Number 5, the value. What is the value of achieving this goal? You know, what's the big deal if I achieve this, if I make these measures of success mentioned above? Now, Harvey thinks about it. He thinks staff development is valuable. That will occur. Improved communication is a second. A third is improved commitment. And a fourth would be to free up more discretionary time for himself to do higher value-added leadership work. So those are pretty big payoffs that up to the value of Harvey wanting to proceed with this behavioral goal. Number 6, competing commitments. Now, you made a commitment, whatever it might be, and Harvey's made his commitment for a more inclusive style of management. These typically are tendencies, priorities, and preferences stemming from one's core and current mental models that sometimes get in the way of getting in the way of what we want to do with our behavioral change. Now, Harvey thinks about this, and there's 2 competing commitments he comes up with. One is, and this all ties back to all the things we discussed in this first area of emphasis. One is that his natural core is leadership style is one of being highly directive. That's just being him. That's his natural behavioral core style, directive. Another one comes from his mental models, and that he's carrying around currently mental model that says, gee whiz, as a boss, you've got to have the answers. This comes from several bosses Harvey worked with, and he picked up with that assumption from them. And to not be in charge and have the answers and so forth could be perceived as a sign of weakness. So those are two pretty strong competing commitments that Harvey's carrying around, and he's got to deal with that, change his way of thinking and his behavior. So both a practice and a change in his mental model. So what he needs to do is to change his assumptions as to what constitutes effective leadership, leader manager behavior, and use adaptive versus, we talked about this last episode, use adaptive versus natural behavior in working with his staff. So we got to change the way he thinks about it and change the way he goes about it. And hopefully, as he begins to get some results, it facilitates this shift for Harvey from going from a highly directed form of direction, management, to a more consultative, collaborative, and delegative form. Okay, number 7 of the 9, competency. Are there any additional knowledge or skills you need to achieve the behavioral change goal that you have? In making behavioral change, most of the time it is not a matter, at least this has been certainly my experience, and I bet yours, it's not a matter of possessing the needed competency, the can-dos. It's more of a matter of the commitment, the will-dos. Now, there may be exceptions to that, but, in Harvey's particular case, he doesn't figure there's any additional knowledge or skills he needed. He knows he can do it. He can be more collaborative and delegative if he puts his mind to it and really wants to make this shift as opportunities present themselves. So now we get down to the brass tacks here. We get number 8 of the 9 steps, implementation plan. Now, it's going to be a little bit different for you. I'm going to give you something I think is going to be unique here. Based on the analysis, what is an effective implementation you have to accomplish the behavioral change goal that you have? What are the implementation guidelines and steps? So in terms of self-coaching, and I titled this Self-Coaching Making Behavioral Change, there are 2 unique things here that I think will be unique to you and very, very valuable in making this kind of change, behavioral change. One is deliberate practices you will follow to help you make the behavioral transition. Deliberate practices, things you're going to do. Again, we're talking about change here that requires more than just a good intention or the will to change. Sometimes that's all it takes, okay? I'm just going to start doing this tomorrow and bingo, there you go. Great for you. But sometimes it takes a lot more than that, especially as these natural kind of behaviors are perhaps competing commitments, and then you have some mental models that need to be revised, your assumptions about what is. So one part of self-coaching is deliberate practices, and the second related part is to have self-observation questions related to the practices. How will I know? And very, very valuable and requires some thought about this, and we'll use Harvey as an example in a second. So what is a deliberate practice versus just any old practice? Deliberate practice is recurring behavior with a specific standard or concept in mind. Recurring behavior with a specific standard or concept in mind. Now, in Harvey's case, it's, making this shift and be more participative, consultative with his group. That's the deliberate practice. The self-observation is questions I will ask myself to gauge my progress. How am I doing in accordance with this goal here? So let's get a metaphor going here. Let's pick golf. I'm a struggling golfer, just like maybe many of you are, or maybe some of you are really good. That's great. I started late, so I needed all the practice I could get and so forth. But the difference here, to use golf again as a metaphor, deliberate practice is not just going out and hacking away at the ball. And even if you're not a golfer, you can appreciate this metaphor. You can have 100 balls or 1,000 balls and whack away and so forth. If anything, sometimes it makes you worse as you groove bad habits, okay? You get your motor memory started in the wrong way. So deliberate practice is to have a goal there, a standard in mind, a norm in mind. So you're going to be using the different clubs in the bag and concentrating on your take back and your impact and your follow through and trying to put spin on the ball to shape the shot maybe left or right or do chips and pitches and all of that. That's deliberate practice. And you have a golf range there, which is a great feedback device. How's it going? How many yards you're getting? And is the ball doing what you want it to do? Is it spinning the way you want it to spin? That's the self-observation part. So there's a great metaphor here of a golf swing that you really concentrate on parts of your game, and then you're getting feedback, your self-observation because of the range. Now, we don't have that, most times we don't have a feedback range and you're making behavior change like a golf course range, and you don't have the clubs and the balls, everything like that. So we have to be a little bit innovative here. And that's what we're going to talk about now as we look at Harvey. So Harvey, as he looks at his implementation guidelines and steps first and gets to the relevant practices in self-observation, in terms of implementation guidelines and steps, he thinks it's wise to share this goal and rationale with his staff. Tell him what he wants to do. Now, it requires a little bit of courage there, that sort of thing. And he opens himself up a little bit, but that's what leadership is all about. And the courage to make change and then benefit from it. So he wants to share it with his goal, and maybe they can, his staff, and maybe they can help him. He also wants to know some of the hopes and concerns they may have about him trying to make this shift, okay? And again, vulnerability is not a bad thing. Vulnerability is, again, the road to courage, which is, again, the road to innovation and change and productivity. So he's going to be a little bit vulnerable, but he's okay with that, and he can handle that. Another implementation guideline is to only collaborate and delegate when he's assured that the affected people or the group as a whole or individuals have the task or responsibility maturity, that is the competence and motivation to be successful. We've talked about that in our previous episodes. Very, very important concept for you as a leader about maturity, task, responsibility, maturity. Are they ready? If not, performance coaching or training is in order. Again, that's maturity is competence and motivation. And the last thought Harvey has here is to provide coaching when necessary, performance coaching to individuals or the group. So now he thinks about it, and, he can't snap his fingers, and he goes into his next staff meeting, and it's just going to happen. So he's got to engage in some practices and then related self-observation. So as he thinks about it, he decides over the next couple of months, Harvey does, he's going to keep a record of the times he's gone away from his directive natural style and involved the group a little bit more in problem solving, decision making, and planning, a more collaborative or delegative leadership manager behavior. And as he does make these little recordings after the meeting, after each of these meetings or individual interactions he had with his staff, he's going to make note of any hopes or concerns he had when going into this more collaborative style. He's going to make note of any discussion of desired results when doing so with the group or with individuals. He wants to also make note of discussion regarding the what's and the how's in making any delegations. We talked about that in a recent episode about the art of delegation and any coaching he did. Okay, so he wants to make note of hopes and concerns, discussions he's had about desired results, the what's and the how's in making decisions, and coaching. Now self-observation, so he'll make these notes and stick them in a file, follow-up file. And self-observation is that he'll put it in the file, and then as appropriate date he assigns to it, he's going to take a look at this as time goes by and see what the results have been. And the questions he wants to ask himself as he self-observes are several. Number one, what has been the results of this collaborative delegated style versus what I normally might have done? What staff learning or growth do I perceive has gone on because of the more inclusive nature of the way I've interact with my staff? what might I have done differently with this particular engagement that he pulls from the file, and what have I learned from this? So those are his self-observation questions he's going to ask. And he has a staff meeting every week. And so he's going to have several of these notations and so forth. He may not need the whole 2 months, and he might find it's working so well that he's able to make this shift fairly easily. Maybe not. Maybe he needs to keep sticking it out with these practices and self-observation. So that's what you want to do when you get to the point where you think that it's part of your habitual you now. There's almost we talked about in the earlier episode of your subconscious you versus your conscious you. Then, you have this adaptive behaviors kicked in for Harvey, and his mental models have been, assumptions have been revised. So he doesn't need to think too much about it. But it's important as you try to make these shifts to carve out practices, deliberate practices, and related self-observation pieces so that you can gauge this progress. Otherwise, it's just, again, hoping that it'll happen, okay? And again, it'd be nice if we had these golf ranges so you could hit the balls and see what happens, but it's not all that easy. But it's fun and challenging, and you'll be quite pleased, I'm sure, if you really apply yourself to this. So let's talk about the ninth step here, measuring progress. Here is another maybe a surprise for you in this particular process, is I recommend you measure your progress when making behavioral shifts by looking backwards instead of forward. What? Yeah. And especially for us leaders, because, we're used to moving forward, setting ambitious goals, envisioning the future, the desired future state, engaging our progress with using our heavy achievement motivations towards going that way. But in measuring behavioral change, it leads, I think, and some other people do too, that to getting frustrated. So I think it's especially valuable for us as leaders. So we want to celebrate and identify our gains rather than getting frustrated and possibly give up focusing on the gaps that exist between where I'm at now and this long distance I still need to go. But gee whiz, if I look back, after the next several meetings Harvey's had, he said, hey, I'm kind of liking what's happening here. So think about that, okay? When you're making a behavioral change, not when you're, managing your organization, but that's important too. You want to look forward, but maybe look back too. But for behavioral change, I recommend this to you. All right. Again, you can just continue consciously working on whatever behavior change you're making when it becomes part of the habitual you, and you made the necessary shifts, and then get on with something else. All right. Quite a process here. I think is very, very sound. If you have a meeting application, go for it. If not, you can go back to my site and pick up on this particular episode when the need is appropriate for you, and then get with it. So keep this definitely in mind. It's a dynamite process. Again, thanks for the years, and we'll see you next time as we start a new area of emphasis. We're going to move from the skillful, self-aware you as a leader to architecting and implementing a sound strategy. Very, very important piece. Okay, you take care of yourself, and we'll see you next time.